So that's and then- well, welcome to Tea Time. And tonight we are back on Zoom. That's right, we are on Plan B. You see things happen, technology always happens. So, but Miss Liz has a backup. And I am joined with the beautiful Marilyn Kriete. And we're going to talk about grief and all of that good stuff and her memoirs and how the difference is between a memoir and an author, like a children's book, science fiction. We're going to get right into that. So before we get started, we're going to do all of the good stuff. Everyone knows the routine, the disclaimer of Miss Liz. And then we're going to do a beautiful video that I've created for Marilyn to put with her links later on when we're done the show. So if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments and Miss Liz will get them, that's for sure. And we will get those out there. So the disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live shows. Miss Liz is going live using YouTube. So before leaving a comment, please grant YouTube permission to see your name at youtube.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show or in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect that and I will see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all tea times this year are on Thursday unless they are rescheduled tea times. So be sure to check out that. So now let's get a little bit into Marilyn Kriete. Who is Marilyn Kriete? Well, after a colorful year spent in 4 continents and 16 cities, working as a cook, chambermaid, waitress, fisherwoman, missionary, speaker, teacher, tutor, and academic writing editor, she now lives in British Columbia with her super supportive husband and 2 attentive seeking cats. She has 2 grown kids and a beloved grandchild, all living too far away. I get that, living too far. Her favorite activities, writing and dreaming. She enjoys hiking, cycling, blogging, playing word games, watching documentaries, having deep talks, and reading other people's memoirs. Her poetry and nonfiction have appeared in the Lyrics, Storyteller, the Eastern Iowa Review, the English Bay Review, and Brevity Blog, and Longreads. So again, a beautiful, beautiful bio and a beautiful woman sitting here. So let's just get and spill some tea. Let's really get out there. But before we do that, we're going to get into a little video and we're going to share. So sit back, enjoy. We're just going to get that going for you all. Review, the English Bay Review, and Brevity Blog, and Longreads. So again, a beautiful, beautiful bio and a beautiful woman sitting here. So let's just get and spill some tea. Let's really get out there. But before we do, And there we are. I'm not sure if the video played correctly or not, but we're gonna get it. It's up there. I will fix any edits that need to be fixed. So again, Marilyn, welcome to Tea Time. It is an honor to have you here. So share a little bit on who you are and how it all began, on how you started writing memoirs.
Okay, well, I'll start by saying, like you, I'm a Canadian, but I've lived a lot of years outside of Canada, and I've had a very, let's say, unconventional life. Starting even as a child, I was very independent and kind of did a lot of things kind of ahead of schedule. Really wanted to be a hippie. Had a lot of conflict and struggle with especially with my relationship with my mother, and so it led to me running away at 14 and running away to Vancouver actually, and ending up eventually in a girls' home run by nuns. And so for about 6 years, I was completely estranged from my family. They at the girls' home, they tried to reconcile me with my mom, but it was just kind of, it was just not happening. So yeah, so I grew up kind of fast that way. And then at 16, they decided I was ready to be out on my own. So they just kind of sent me out loose into the world. And I started working full time, actually 2 jobs. And at that point, I just finished grade 11. I had every intention of going back to finish high school. But then when I got into the working world, I just found that I enjoyed it so much that I didn't feel very motivated to go back to school. A decision that I really regret looking back, but at the time it seemed like, the direction I was going. So I was on my own at 16, and then actually a lot of this story is kind of what I'm telling this first memoir. Takes me up to age 24. In my early 20s, I ended up falling deeply in love with a man named Jack, and he became kind of the person that filled in all the gaps in my life. He kind of compensated for what I didn't have with my family, what I didn't have with my parents. He was about 8 years older than me. He was extremely, I was just very devoted and supportive, and brought out the best in me and helped me sort of view myself through new eyes and have newfound confidence and so on. And anyway, we had a very profound and deep love with each other and planned to marry. And one of our first plans together was a long distance bicycle trip to South America. So we set off on that trip in 1977, I think, or so. And we cycled about 3,000 miles, and it was amazing. And then he had cancer before that point, but we kind of blew it off and thought it was over and done, and didn't even think it was, we just felt like it was a past chapter. But the cancer returned, and so it ended up canceling our trip. And then within a few months, he died. And that loss for me was so profound and so overwhelming. Like, he was my whole life. He was everything. And I think what happened was I wasn't in a place, I wasn't mature enough or ready to deal with the grief. So what I did was, within a week or two of him dying, I got back on my bicycle and started riding off by myself on all these adventures. That's me and my bike here. It's an actual picture taken when I was on those journeys. And I kind of just threw myself into that and tried to cycle my way into, I guess, into finding a new chapter, a new purpose, whatever. And I had a lot of amazing adventures on those. That was kind of a long extended trip that covered a couple of years off and on. And then I guess I thought that I had dealt with the grief by doing that, but in fact, I hadn't dealt with it at all. I pushed it down really deep and really far. And what happened was I ended up becoming a Christian when I was 24, meeting my husband a few months later, my future husband. Within a year of meeting him, we were married, and I jumped into the full-time ministry with him, and our lives got extremely, extremely busy. We moving a lot, traveling a lot, sent all over the world. And so for about 20 years, that grief just hid inside me. And I think there were probably moments when it kind of tried to surface, but I just pushed it down, pushed it down, pushed it down. And then 20 years later, a few things kind of triggered it. One of the big triggers was watching the movie Titanic. The story of Jack and Rose sort of mirrored the relationship that I'd had with Jack. This kind of, Jack rescues Rose and Rose rescues Jack, and then, Jack is gone. And so that movie really tripped a switch with me. And a few other things happened, and the grief just blew up in my life 20 years later. And it felt as if Jack had just died. And I felt as if I was 22 years old again. And it was like this huge disconnect between what my life had become and who I was. And I was I was involved in the ministry. I was always just with people all the time and giving and serving and encouraging and helping, and ignoring my own needs for the most part. There's this big disconnect between the Marilyn that went underground when Jack died and the Marilyn that had been functioning since then. And so when this grief came up again, it was totally overwhelming and very inappropriate. I mean, I'm married now, I've got 2 kids. There's really no space in my life to grieve, but the grief was very insistent, and I needed to deal with it. I was just basically dysfunctional. I was crying all the time. I was falling apart. I couldn't push it away any longer. And so, so as far as writing the books, the first book, Paradise Road, tells that story up to.
Okay, so Paradise Road is the first book.
Is the first book, yeah.
Okay.
And that one basically tells my troubled, adventurous childhood, my running away, my time in the girls' home, my first my first boyfriend for 3.5 years, my hippie adventures, meeting Jack, our travels together, his death, my jumping back on the bike and running away, cycling away, and then the amazing things that God did to kind of pull me back in and point me to him. So that's where that book ends. And I kind of always knew that I was going to write that story one day, but just because, well, I mean, one main reason was I thought it was quite an amazing story. There were a lot of pretty, just unusual and funny and interesting and tragic, and just, I don't know, it just felt like it was worth writing a book memoir. So that I was kind of carrying with me for a long time.
Well, and it helps with the grief as well, I find, writing, right? Because we can express ourselves without judgment. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people, when it's complicated grief, they're like, okay, well, this is like 20 years ago, get over it. I've heard that a lot, because complicated grief is a lot different than grief, and we don't speak about the different types of griefs that are out there. And I think by having you write this memoir, Marilyn, it actually opens that door of other people understanding what complicated grief is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's exactly why I wrote the second one. So the second one is called The Box Must Be Empty. And that basically picks up my story, 20 years later, when the grief erupted in my life and almost basically, it really almost wiped me out. I mean, it's basically a survival tale. And one of the things that happened at that time was I went off to see this therapist, and actually ended up moving a whole family. We were in the ministry, we were moved to a different city. We moved to Philadelphia so I could meet with this particular therapist, who I had met with before when I was dealing with some grief about leaving Africa, because we'd lived there for about 6 years, and leaving was really, really hard for us. And so I went and saw him a bit about that. And then I was referred back to him when this huge grief came up again. And he was great he was a great listener, and I felt really comfortable with him. And I spent many, many hours in his office, weeping and crying and sharing and reading and journaling, whatever. But he wasn't really able to guide me very well through it. I felt like we were both just kind of floundering through this ocean, and he was having his own issues. And a lot of times, the advice he gave me would be very contradictory. He'd say one thing one session, and the next session be the opposite or whatever. And anyway, I was just starting to feel like I really need to figure out what it is I'm dealing with, because I don't think the word complicated grief or delayed grief, or another word, disenfranchised grief, ever came up with him. But one of the things I did at that point was I went to the library. This is pre-internet days for me. And I just started reading every book I could find about, grief and depression and whatever, and trying to figure myself out. And I really didn't come across even this whole delayed grief. I think I came across that term.
Yeah.
But even then, when I read about it, there wasn't much written. And most of the time it was kind of like, most people deal with their grief in the first year, but for some people it might not be for a couple years. And I'm like, couple years, like I am 20 years later, drowning in this grief. And I couldn't find a single example of anyone going through this, not one, in a book or in real life. And when I told people what I was going through, people just gave me like the strangest looks, And so at that point, I kind of made a mental note to myself, okay, one day, Marilyn, you're going to write a book about this, because someone out there is going to need this book that you yourself can't find. And, when the time is right, you'll write that book too. So both books, I'd say, were books that I carried inside for a long time before I had the space in my life to start writing. And also, a lot of people kind of will often think, oh, like you mentioned, it must be very therapeutic to write about grief. And it is very therapeutic to write when you're grieving. But I didn't start writing either of these books until I had really processed the grief through other means, other writing and other ways. And so when I sat down to write both books, each book, I wasn't plowing my way through the grief again. I was writing about what it was like and what I learned and what I wanted to share with the world. It was still an emotional journey, writing both books, but it wasn't as if I was, digging my way through the cave at that point. I was kind of on the other end of things, and I felt like I've learned enough now that I've got something worth sharing with other people.
Well, and you made a good point there too, Marilyn, that when you went looking in the libraries and stuff like that for research, you didn't find very much out there, and there isn't very much out there.
No.
I deal with complicated grief too, and a lot of people are, well, get over it. It's 25 years, it's 30 years. Okay,
Yeah.
well, grief doesn't have a time limit on it, and it comes and goes when it wants. You have no control over it, right? It's moments and smells and location sometimes will set you off and say, you know what, I remember that, or I want to remember that. So grief is very complicated. And even if it's 1 year or 20 years, it's complicated. Grief in period is just really complicated. And there's not enough out there about it.
It definitely isn't. Yeah.
So
even now, I go on now we're on the internet, we can do a lot more easy research. I still don't find very much written about it. And I really do hope that this book will kind of open that door for discussion and just information and reassurance for people that are going through it. And I think there are probably a lot of people out there that are carrying around a lot of delayed and unprocessed and unfinished grief and don't even realize that that's what they're dealing with. And I'm hoping that, not that I want to open up a can of worms in anyone's life, but
no, but sometimes we have to open up those can of worms for people to understand that there is not education out there. There is no awareness out there. And this is what Teatime is all about. It's bringing the awareness through our stories that, we need more of it out there. As somebody who has gone through grief myself, I feel the same way, Marilyn, where there's not enough out there. And we need the personal stories in order to understand that we're not alone, right? Because when we go to share and support groups, we're sharing our stories with people. So this is exactly what we're doing tonight, is we're sharing our stories and we're getting it out there. Now, I want to know what the difference is between a memoir and just a novel.
Okay, well, a memoir, number one, it's got to be true. Novel, you make everything up, or you can draw from things and, your experience, whatever, but novels are basically fiction. Memoirs are, the memoirist is really supposed to be telling, always speaking the truth. And there's a difference between a memoir and an autobiography. So autobiography is basically just somebody telling, the events in their life without maybe a particular theme that they're focusing on. Whereas a memoir will be more focused in terms of either a time period or a theme of things that have got like, grief, for example. My second memoir is definitely, one of the main themes is grief, also spiritual trauma. And I deal with other things in that book too. I deal with perimenopause and that time of life, and reinventing ourselves when what happens when our world falls apart and we have to start over in middle age. I'll deal with that. And yeah, a lot of things that kind of tie that thematically together. So I'm not sharing every single thing that happened to me during that time. I'm sharing the events and incidents and things I've learned that relate to those themes. So yeah.
There were questions that were sent in prior, because this is a rescheduled tea time, and they wanted to know how you got the titles of your book.
Okay. Yeah, well, Paradise Road, I had a bunch of different titles as I was working on the book, and none of them kind of felt quite right. And then actually where the title came from is on my, actually turned out to be my last long bicycle trip. I was cycling by myself through parts of Idaho and Montana. And the part of the story where God starts kind of chasing me down, a lot of very coincidental things start happening to me. And I just have to say this, I was describing myself as I was a very spiritual person. I was always interested in kind of, the spiritual, the unseen world, whatever, but I was very new agey, and I was open to pretty much anything except Christianity. So God had to do a lot of things to sort of break down my resistance to that. Anyway, so part of that story, I met somebody that was trying to reach out and share the gospel with me, and I was very, very close to it. And I kind of get away from him, and I meet this guy in Montana, and he's a born again guy, and he tries to convince me he tries to share his faith with me, and then we have a campfire one night and we talk for hours, and I'm telling him all about what I believe and he's telling me what he believes, and we're just kind of like, neither one is changing anyone's mind 1 inch. And then what happened was the next morning, he said goodnight, he went back to town, and wherever he lived, I didn't know, but so I crawled back in my tent, and the next morning it started pouring rain, so I didn't get up and start riding away as I would have. I waited till the rain stopped. I had no idea what time it was, didn't carry a watch, whatever, no cell phones those days. So anyway, so when the rain stopped, I packed up my tent and stuff, got on my bike, cycled back into town, and stopped at the first gas station to get coffee or whatever. And just as I'm coming out with my coffee, I hear, "Hey, Marilyn, over here." And this guy, Scott, who spent the previous evening trying to convert me, basically, is standing across the highway in front of his church, wearing a suit, holding his Bible and waving at me. And I was enough of a believer in God to think, okay, God is wanting me to go into this church. Okay, so that brought me into the church. And so I go to this church group, and it's a very folksy little country church, and I cry and cry, not because I want to be a Christian, but just crying, I think, just feeling sad about my life and feeling like, oh, these lovely little Christians have such a nice, simple little belief system. And wouldn't it be nice if I could, but I never could because I'm way beyond that. And like, it was a very prideful attitude, but yeah. Anyway, and then after church, I think Scott saw me crying and thought, she's opening up.
She's hooked in, she's in.
She's in. I wasn't in at all, but anyway, he invited me out for lunch, and I met a few of his friends, and he's like, he really wanted me to stick around. I'm like, nope, I'm glad I went to church. It was interesting, and it was nice meeting you, but I'm off, And he tried to give me a Bible, and I'm like, nope, don't need the Bible, whatever. So I rode off, and about but what happened was God was just kind of following me with these storm clouds. So I was riding off, and I kept getting stormed out and rained out, and I have to pull to the side of the road and stop. And so 2 or 3 days later, I'm in this little town called Paradise, Montana. Actually, not in the town, outside the town, and camping on this hill while it rains and rains and rains, and thinking how ironic it is that I'm in a place called Paradise, and I'm so miserable and alone. And gee, I wish I brought that Bible. I'd have something to read right now. So that was one of the moments in that journey. So, and what ended up happening is, after the rain stops in Paradise, I load up my bike again. It's 3 days later. I think I'll never see this Scott guy again. I ride into the next little town, park at the gas station, go inside to get something, come back out, and who's sitting there in his pickup truck but Scott, this big grin, telling me how he's been praying to the Lord to find me, and he, spotted my bike, and we're miles down the road from his town. Anyway, it was one of those God stories, right? So anyway, so that's where the paradise comes from. And because that first book is definitely a kind of a journey, Paradise Road seemed to be a good fit for that title. So that's a long answer for a short title.
No, but it gives us a story behind the title, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what that person wanted, was the story of why, because why do we give our titles to our books, right? When we're writing a book of any sort, poetry, autobiography, memoirs, nonfiction. Well, how do we get our titles, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where this person was looking for, was the answer, and you get the answer.
And the second title, I'll try to be a little briefer, but The Box Must Be Empty. That actually came from a talk that I had with my therapist early on. And one of the things that when I first went to see him, his quick and easy solution to my grief, his suggestion was that we have a little memorial service for Jack. And he wanted me to go out and get some kind of little box that I would kind of represent a coffin, I guess, whatever. And we would do this little memorial. My husband would be there, and we would kind of say goodbye to Jack and bury the box. And I remember saying to him, I remember first of all, feeling very panicked because I wasn't ready for the step at all yet. It was, the grief had just come up, and he's like asking me to say goodbye. And I'm like, you know what? I've been denying this goodbye for 20 years. I'm not there. But anyway, so I asked, can I put something in the box? Can I put in some photos? Can I write him a letter, whatever? He's like, no, the box must be empty.
Oh.
And so that little phrase just stuck with me. And I ended up not doing that little ceremony with him, because I just told him, like, this is not going to help me. I can tell you right now, it's not what I need. It's not going to work. So we canceled that. But then later on, when I came to the end of the journey, like years later, and I was thinking about that little phrase, the box must be empty, I thought it's very representative of the nature of grief, in that we can't bury live grief and expect it's just going to go away. It won't just decompose like a body would. It stays very much alive. In fact, it grows underground, and it becomes harder and harder to disentangle and harder to process the longer we let it. And it starts absorbing all our other griefs in life, all our other losses and sorrows. Just kind of, if we're not dealing with grief, we tend to just do the same thing with future griefs, right? And so that the idea of the box must be empty came to me, of that the idea that we can't bury our grief. We have to somehow process it when we're ready. But it won't go away if we just try to push it down. So that's
and I love that you say that, Marilyn, when you're ready. People have to understand that everyone grieves differently. And because it makes you uncomfortable, because we're still hurting, we're still in grief. We can't just take a switch and okay, we're going to do it. And I like that you shared that story of this person asking you to do it, and then you're like, no, this is not going to work, because you knew what was going to work for you, because it's your grief, right? It's not my grief, it's not that person's grief, it's your grief, right? And whether it takes 40, 50 years, it's when we're ready. But I really like the concept of the empty box, because grief is empty. Right? It is really empty, because
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, once I still think about Jack a lot, all the time. There's lots of things that remind me of him all the time. And he was such a huge part of my life and who I am. And he made such an impact on me that it would be crazy to think that I could ever forget him, or, but it's not like the grief doesn't dominate my life anymore. Like, I still miss him. I still wish I'd love to have another conversation with him at times, but because the grief is processed, now the box can kind of rest, and I can open it when I want, and it's not ruining my life anymore, if that makes sense. So, but the grief, it's still there. The loss will always be felt, right?
Well, and we're not trying to replace people that we lose either. We're and we don't want to forget them, but at some point, our grief, sometimes it overtakes what we're living in the present. And like you
Yeah.
said, like you felt guilty because you were already married again and you were in a relationship and this was 20
Yeah.
years, and then
Yeah.
you're like, why is all this coming up? But it could have
Exactly.
been
Yeah.
something that triggered or said, you know what, hey, you didn't say goodbye to me yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we get those little messages and little wings. I know what my daughter, she does that from time to time, and I'll see butterflies or I'll see something and I'm like, oh, okay, I got it. I gotta,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, you're still
Yeah.
here. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so by writing the memoirs, Marilyn, what has it done for you, for your life?
Um, well, first of all, it was very enjoyable. Especially writing the first one, I think, because it was, I was kind of going back to my childhood and revisiting a lot of things. And a lot of people have commented that even though the content, like the story of Paradise Road, there's a lot of sad things that happened to me, but there's a lot of humor in the book too. And, you can tell by reading it that I'm not wallowing in anything. I'm just sharing the journey, but a lot of really cool things happen too. And so it helped me, I think, look back and appreciate my life more. And then again, having it out in the world is connecting me with a lot of amazing people. It's been great to find readers and to share my book. It's a funny thing too, because I didn't tell a lot of people my story when I became a Christian and then I got into the ministry. I was pretty open about who I am, whatever, but I didn't really get into the details of my life. So a lot of my old friends, read this book and they're like, I had no idea that happened with you. I'm like, I guess I never told you. So it's kind of nice to share it. And then with the second book, it's actually, the release day is coming up April 4th. So I haven't really felt the full, impact of that yet on other readers, but it felt really good to just to write an account of it and to realize what I've learned and to be able to point people to, share what helped me and maybe point people to some things that might help them. So that's very gratifying it's kind of redemptive, right? To be able to take your pain and use it to help and encourage others. So, yeah.
So do you offer your books for support, like in grief support groups and that? Do you recommend?
Yeah, well, that's a great idea. I haven't thought about doing that, but like I said, the book is still just, the pre-order stage. It's not out in the world yet. But yeah, that's a great idea. And I haven't been to, I've only actually ever went to one grief support group and it was a total disaster because I went into this group. It was another suggestion that my therapist gave me. He's like, well, maybe you should check out a grief support group. So I'm like, okay. So I found one at a hospital and I go in there and there's maybe 10, 12 people and everybody starts sharing their grief. And it's like, I'm Tom and my wife died 3 months ago and I'm Betty and I'm, my husband died last year. Every grief was like within a year. And then my turn came and I'm like, I'm here because, my fiance died, 20 years ago, struggling with it still. And the horror on their faces was just like, I felt so out of place. And I think I freaked them all out. And so I didn't even actually stay for the group. I got up at the coffee break.
And I feel that there's not enough support groups with different time frames of grief. We shouldn't be able to just go into a support group and say, you know what, well, it's 25 years. I know when I went for my daughter, it was 33 years and everybody had lost newborn babies and stillborns, and mine was 33 years ago and I just couldn't comprehend. And the faces that you do get when it's so many years later, they're like,
what's wrong with you, kind of?
Why are you here for? Like, you should have been over this a long time ago. And a lot of people when they're going through grief, and we shouldn't be shooting on anybody. We should be opening up our hearts and understanding that each person is at a different process, right? At a different time frame. And I really love sharing about grief because we need that education out there, because grief is a part of life.
It is.
We were all born and we're all going to pass. So we're all going to grieve. Somebody's going to grieve us one day. So we need to have that education out there, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we do have another question that came in about missionary work. Do you recommend it, and how long were you in it for?
I recommend it. I love the years that we were overseas missionaries. We lived in, we went first from Toronto to Bombay, India, when it was still Bombay.
Oh.
And I always had this dream about going to India. Even as a little girl, I just was fascinated by India. So that was kind of a dream come true. And that's my third memoir is all about that time in Bombay. It's not published yet, but it will be. And that ended up being a lot shorter of a stay. We had trouble with the authorities after a couple of years, and we had to leave quite suddenly. And so kind of left India to get a new visa, and never was able to go back. Till much later I went back. Actually, I ended up adopting my son there. That was, I think, the real reason we went there. And so I went back with him when he was like 17, so he could meet some of his birth family. So that was the first and only time I went back to India. So anyway, that was an amazing time. And then we were in London for a little bit, and then from there we were sent to Lagos, Nigeria, which was major culture shock and very hard place to adjust to initially, but we just fell in love with it. We just loved the people. It was probably one of the best times of my whole life. And again, we got pulled out of there unwillingly and sent from there. After 4 years, we were sent to South Africa, which was another amazing place to go. We were there in Pretoria when Nelson Mandela was elected. So that was quite an amazing time to be there too. So yeah, so those years of my life were very precious years, and I loved that experience. And in both places, in India and Africa, we never wanted to come back to North America. We were just like, just leave us here. We're so happy. We loved the lifestyle. We loved everything about it. But that wasn't in the plans. And the organization that we worked for sent us a lot of places and then sent us back to the States, whatever. And so, yeah. So I guess I'd say if you feel called by God and you have an adventurous spirit, go for it. Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot to learn from it too, right? A lot of culture shock and traditions and culture, and and it's a new way of living as well, and it makes you grateful for what you have when you come back to a self-developed country, when you go to an undeveloped country, correct?
Sure. Yeah. I just love that. I just love how it broadens your whole. It broadens you as a person, I think, to live in other places and learn to just learn how other people think and live, and so I loved it. I'm very, very grateful that I had that opportunity, and I wish we could have stayed longer, but yeah.
So Marilyn, if you also write poetry, so what got you into the poetry?
Well, the poetry was actually my screen's frozen here. Is yours looking good?
Yeah, you kind of look like black and white, but I can still hear you.
Okay, I turned into a drawing all of a sudden.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It looks like a lithograph. Somebody made a lithograph out of me. So okay, I guess we'll just let it go. Yeah, so the poetry was when I started writing again was, I kind of carried these books inside and knew I'd write one day. I always knew I was a writer. I just didn't have time in my life to write. Now I'm a lithograph with yellow and blue stripes. Oh, okay.
There's a lot of color coming from you.
Yeah, lots of stuff coming out here. Yeah, so, but all the years we were in the ministry, which is over 20 some years, our lives were insanely busy with people and appointments, like every day, all day, 7 days a week, from morning till night. And so I just didn't have the space to write. So when when we got out of the ministry and moved back to Canada, it was when I finally felt like I had time and space to start writing. But I started with, just kind of writing short little bits. And then one day a poem just kind of came to me, and I wrote it down, and it just kind of came out fully formed. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And that kind of got me into the poetry thing. And so for I don't know, 2-3 years, I was writing poetry pretty much every day. I'd sit down and either write a poem or revise and work on a poem that I'd already written. And I think it was very, I loved it. It was very, I think it was very key to my writing journey. It really helped me to polish my writing skills. Because when you're writing poetry, you're aiming for, description and concision and word choice and whatever. And I think that made me a better writer when it finally came time to start writing my books. I haven't written poetry for a while now. Like, I've really been caught up with the book writing, and I really love that. But I do think sometimes I think, oh, I should try to get back into poetry, because it's a whole different, I don't know, I think you're using a different side of the brain. It's a whole different way
Yep,
of writing.
it is.
Yeah, and I kind of miss it, but at the same time, I love the memoir as well, memoir writing as well.
So when you're
yeah.
writing poetry, is it about grief?
Is it what?
Is it about grief, romance, love?
Um, the poetry was like, it was all over the place. Like, it's kind of like whatever came to me. I did write quite a bit of poetry about, as I was processing the Jack grief still. I started writing some poetry about that, and that was really helpful, just in kind of clarifying some of my deeper feelings about him and about the loss and about why it had affected me so profoundly. But then I wrote other poems just about all kinds, I mean, just random things about day-to-day experiences. And yeah, so one thing I love to do is I just like to, like, I had a big old fat dictionary, and I'd like to just read the dictionary and find an interesting word that
Oh,
yeah,
that's
and
cool.
use that word, like I remember a poem called accelerando, which is a musical term for speeding up and writing, and just taking that word and letting that be kind of the jump off point for a poem. So I wrote a lot of poems with kind of that word prompting,
Okay.
and then just all different kinds. So
I kind of
yeah,
like that word prompting.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I kind of use pictures, like a newspaper or something. I'll see a
yeah.
picture and then I look within the picture. And then
Okay,
kind of like the words come out, right? Like there's like a journey in
yeah,
there. There's a love romance. I've been mad at
yeah,
you, like kind of in the image, like you can tell with the body language, So I never
yeah.
thought
That's
of doing
cool.
it like that with the dictionary. And it's a good way to educate the mind as well by
Yeah, for
learning
sure.
new words.
Add your vocabulary, and yeah. And
So,
look at a word from all sides and angles, right? Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Words is really interesting. Yeah.
So I think it's a good time to ask you, Marilyn, what would your tea be tonight if I ask you what your tea is? So what 3 words would you give me for the TEA?
The first word that came to mind was travel, just because I have done a lot of traveling in my life and wish I could do more. These days I'm not, but I do get to travel in my mind a lot, revisit places I've been and visited before. The E, endurance.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like that. And that goes with
Um,
what you do.
yeah. Well, endurance, it has a lot of meaning for me, but I don't want to sound like I'm wallowing in stuff, but my life has had a lot of challenges, and even now, like, from a distance, my life might look free and easy, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, um, with family members and stuff that's been really tough, really tough. Some of the toughest stuff ever, maybe the toughest stuff ever. And a lot of times I just feel like, my theme word is just enduring it, just carry. I pray a lot and try to live in the moment, try to live in the day, try not to project too much in the future, but just, endure it. And life does feel like a long marathon at times, and you have to keep running. And then 3 words came to mind. One was agape, which is the Greek word for love. And one was affection. And one was attention. So I don't know of those 3, which I probably pick a different one each day, depending on the mood I'm in. But
they all kind of go together with love if you put the 3 of them
yeah,
together,
I
right?
guess so.
It's the
Yeah,
affection
attention
and
and affection.
attention of the
Yeah,
love that's missing,
right,
you know?
right. Yeah,
And the
yeah,
endurance of life, pursuing and enduring, continuing on praying, the love of
yeah,
praying,
yeah.
and a lot of people misunderstand prayer. you know
Mhm.
we don't have to fall to our knees to pray. We could be in the
Mhm.
shower, we could be praying, crying outside in the rain, we're praying.
Yeah,
There's no perfect place to prayer for
right,
prayers.
right.
And travel, it is exactly what you've been doing, is you're traveling, and you're traveling
Mhm.
through writing, you're traveling through your stories, traveling
Mhm.
through life, traveling through your children. you know and we seem to overthink what we actually have within us. And this is how we serve tea, is we serve what we've done and what we've gone through. And that's why I can't tell you what your tea is, Marilyn. You can only tell me what it is, because I don't know your story. I don't know your grief. I don't know, right? So it's not right for me to say, you know what, this is your tea. I see this from your story. Da, 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 da. That's kind of like, you should be over your grief. That's we can't do that. We can't be giving people the advice of something we don't even understand ourselves, you know, something we've never gone through. And I really want to thank you for sharing that. That's a strong tea, and I really like it. And I've never heard that word before. The agape.
Agape.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, so there's different. The Greek language has like 4 different words for love. Agape love is just kind of the unconditional love that the kind of love that God has for us, and that we're to have for other people. Is just agape. Is just loving people unconditionally and showing love by action and so on. Storge is another Greek word for love, which describes the love between parent and child. And phileo, which we get the word Philadelphia from, and what that kind of love is kind of the brotherly love, affectionate friendship love that we have. And then the love that we often think of first is eros, which is erotic or romantic love, right? So all 4 are describe different. I think English is kind of lacking that we don't have more words for love, but
right. And you know what? I kind of like it, because I think the word love is overrated. I think too many people overuse it, and they lose the meaning of what love is. And I say this all the time. When someone tells me they love me, tell me another word. Give me another word.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So what has your writing skills taught you about yourself? Like, you write poetry, you write the memoirs. Do you write articles? Do you do any of that stuff, Marilyn?
I write, I try to write like standalone essays and things like that too. People always ask me like, when are you going to write a novel? And you'd probably be such a good novelist. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think there's a novel in me. Like I'm not, I have lots of writer friends now, which has been really fun getting to know writers and stuff. But I am so envious of the people that, they have all these characters popping up in their mind, and they have these scenes that come to them and these storylines that come to them. I'm just not like that, but I can draw a lot. I've had a lot of cool, amazing stuff in my life that I can write about, and that's what I love to do. So even with my shorter pieces, standalone pieces, I call them, they tend to be memoir type things. Based things.
Well, and I think that's why we're all different, right? We all have our own unique writing skills in that.
If
we all were the same, then we wouldn't have all these different types of books out there.
Exactly.
So we need those categories. And you're my first memoir guest that I've had on in 4 years.
Well, I hope I'm not your last. So,
no, you just opened like the new book of worms, because I think memoirs are another way of sharing storytelling as well.
Absolutely.
Because they're based on facts. They're based on the truth, like you said.
And the cool thing about a memoir is you're getting to kind of vicariously live someone's life alongside them, or watch them, but with a really well-written memoir, it's not just the person telling you what this happened and that happened, whatever. There's this element of looking back and reflecting on it and making connections. And I think we can learn so much about other people and about ourselves by reading memoir. Like, memoir is my favorite genre to read, and has been for years too. And that's why it's like, I just feel like, wow, I'm so privileged to get to kind of jump into this other life that I'd never get a chance to experience, and have somebody who's put the time and effort into crafting a great memoir and telling their story in a way that I find it way more satisfying and interesting than most fiction for me.
And you also watch a lot of documentaries too.
You
like the real life stories.
I love true life stories that are hard to believe, but true. I love that stuff.
And there are a lot of them that are hard.
For sure.
So you've received some awards as well, Marilyn. What type of awards have you received for your writing?
Well, Paradise Road has won a few, like won some I don't know, indie book awards, independent, I can't remember the titles now, book excellence awards, whatever. My publisher entered them in the different categories, so it won in a couple categories. I think it won for young adult adventure, even though it's not really a young adult book, but it's a young adult protagonist, obviously. Yeah, and then I've won some awards. I won some writing contests for just standalone pieces. It's always fun to win first prize in something. And I didn't win in this case, but I got published by this online journal called Longreads. It was a longer piece I wrote, almost 7,000 words, about going back to my parents' house. They lived there for 60 plus years, and my mother was in the throes of Alzheimer's and my dad was in denial. And my brother and I, he came from the island, Vancouver Island, and I came from here, and we flew back to Edmonton where we grew up and had all the memories. And we were back in this house together, and we had a 10-day limit to empty this entirely packed, huge old house full of, well, basically my parents never threw anything out. So anyway, so that I wrote the story about that, and it was very cathartic and funny and sad and whatever. And I was really happy with how the story turned out. And I had a hard time finding a place that would publish it because it was so long. And then Longreads found it, took it and liked it and published it. And then they nominated it for a pushcart prize. And I didn't win the pushcart prize. There's tons of nominees and not that many winners, but I don't know, that was kind of a big thrill last year. It was like, wow, I'm a pushcart prize nominee. So that felt good. So,
Well, it's
yeah.
always nice to be nominated too, right? Sometimes
For
just
sure,
being
yeah.
nominated is
Yeah.
the big win, because you're like, oh, really? My stuff?
Somebody
Like,
thinks it's good enough to maybe win, right? Yeah. And writers, I mean, we need that because writing's kind of a lonely activity, and you can put a lot of hours in without getting a whole lot of encouragement. And very often writers will say, the people around them often are very disinterested in reading their books or whatever. And I feel like I've been really fortunate that way. I've had lots of family and friends that have really been supportive, but still, it's really nice to get outside recognition. So,
well, I think by writing a memoir, you have that support, right? Because it's based on facts, it's based on truth. Where a nonfiction or fiction book, they bring in the characters and the scenes and all that. And family and friends are like, okay, well, that's not my cup of tea, like I don't really, I don't like, science fiction, monsters and vampires.
Genre, different genres.
So by writing memoirs, it's actually based on true stories. So it's based on your life. So I think that's where the support is more for a memoir.
There's a curiosity there, I think, because the people that know me are like, oh, tell me more about
or did you write about me?
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Did you change my name?
Yeah, that's the first thing, right? So you also received an award here for your book covers. So is that for the Paradise Road?
Yeah. It's funny, that's really, I think my publisher put that on my bio and not me. I wouldn't put it on my own bio because I did supply the picture. The photo of me was one of I only had like 3 pictures from that time in my life. I didn't travel with the camera. I didn't, but I found this photo that kind of dropped out of this box of papers one day while I was writing the memoir. And it's like, wow, I didn't even know I had this picture, and it's perfect for the cover. So, but the credit to the cover design goes, I think his name is Troy Hunter or something. And he's the guy who does cover design for Lucid House, my publisher. So yeah, he did a great job of putting it all together. But I think I love the cover of the second book even more. And I hope it gets some recognition. And I did get, I'm fortunate that my publisher is very open to input from me. And if I don't like something, she'll like, okay, we won't do that. And so the guy who was designing my book cover for the box had a bunch of different ideas that I wasn't too keen on, but he found that image. He'd done it in kind of some dark, somber colors. I'm like, you know what? It's a little too dark. Like the title alone is heavy. Because the subtitle is, I think it's a memoir of complicated grief, spiritual trauma, and ultimate healing, or whatever. I'm like, you can't have those heavy words and a heavy image with heavy colors. So I said a color palette, and he used that color palette, and I love how that cover turned out. So it's very collaborative. So
yeah, book covers are really nice and relaxing. I find that they're really calming colors. Like they're not like they're not heavy, right? And like you said, the titles of the covers are, Paradise Road. And like I said, like before we started going live, I said I found a beautiful song by Dolly Parton called Paradise Road. And I, as soon as I heard the song, I was like, oh my goodness, this is like starting
That's
a
the
new
right
life
song.
over, and
Yeah,
making a change in your life, and that's what you've actually done, is changed your life by sharing your
yeah,
grief.
yeah. Changed my life a few times.
Right.
I
And that's
had a
where we
lot of
get in life, where
do-overs.
we have to say, you know what, well, we need to change, and things need to change.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
So, Marilyn, any final words before we wrap up? We're almost at the hour here. Any
Yeah,
final words that you
yeah,
would like to share with the audience out there that will watch the replay and that are tuning in right now, about writing memoirs? Any
yeah.
three, maybe give them a couple tips or something, or
About
final
writing
words
or
on.
about reading, or, well, first I want to
Yeah,
say,
sure. Go
if
ahead.
they're just, if they're a reader and you've never read memoir, or it's kind of a new genre for you, I want to encourage you to check it out. Not all memoirs are created equal. Some are better than others, just like, any book genre. I know really popular, kind of one of the all-time favorite memoirs that people often reference is called The Glass Castle. That's a nice start. I say start with this one. Or if you don't mind, or The Glass Castle is highly recommended. It's a great introductory memoir about what a great memoir can be. Yeah, as far as writing, I guess the biggest advice I give an aspiring memoir writer is, don't write your memoir too soon. Like, if you're still kind of in the thick of things, give yourself time to grow through those things and kind of come to a point of some perspective and resolution. Because sometimes I'll read memoirs where people are, there are a lot of memoirs out there, there are a lot of about dealing with trauma and depression or addiction or you know emotionally abusive relationships or whatever it is, and those are great. I mean, people should share their story by all means, but I think you can tell when someone's kind of still in it.
Yep.
And they still have bad attitudes and resentments, and readers pick up on that really easily. So you don't want to write a book that people will be kind of looking at you and going, boy, she's got a lot of junk she needs to clear out of her heart.
Yeah. She hasn't started her healing process yet.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So make sure that's done. But while you're waiting for that, write, because the more you write, the better you get. And you want to bring some developed skills to the story, as well as a story that you've, a life story that you've moved through and processed. So I'd say that. Yeah.
So, and is there a time limit on writing a memoir?
A time limit? I guess as long as your memory is still working, you can still write that memoir. I'm getting a little nervous though, because my fourth memoir is about our years in Africa. And I started it, I got about halfway through the first draft, and then I put it aside, and I haven't opened it for like 2 years now. It's just been doing different things, or maybe even longer. And I keep having this panic feeling of, what if I go back to it and I can't remember things anymore? Because I'm working entirely from memory. I don't have journals, I don't have notes, I don't have pictures hardly. It's just all from here. So yeah, you got to have your brain has to be working, or else you're going to end up making things up, which is not what memoirists are supposed to do. So
yeah.
Well,
and thank you for sharing that, because anybody out there who's writing to heal, there's a difference between writing and healing, and writing and healed,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like you said, if you're still in the junk and you're still in it, do you really want somebody to read all that anger, all that rejection, all of that shame?
Yeah, all the self-pity, whatever it is.
Read that and they'll be like, oh, like it's like you said, right? Like,
yeah, one of my hobbies, actually, I go on Goodreads all the time, and I love reading book reviews there by other readers, right? And I always check out, what the latest memoir, what the reviewers saying, and the readers can be kind of harsh, but they call out people if they just feel like they seem entitled, or unaware, or grudge, carrying grudges or whatever. So yeah, you want to write from as pure of a heart as you can.
well, and you're bringing up something really good. Before we wrap up, Marilyn, I want to get into the book reviews, because as an author, our reviews is what gets the book seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're getting a heavy review of saying this person, like a lot of reviews that are saying the same thing but in different ways, and saying, this person who wrote this book is really heavy, they're still in it, for the longest time I was in my story, and I had to heal in order to get on my story.
Yeah.
So when we're in it, we're in that guilt, that shame, that victim mode,
Yeah.
that oh, you did this, you did,
Yeah.
you know, the blame game. Now, when we're
Absolutely.
on our
Yeah.
story, we're like, you know what, this happened to us, but this didn't change us. This
Yeah.
gave us the steps to be who we are now. Give us the
Right.
voice, give us that, you know. Is that how you
Yeah.
felt when you shared your memoir? Like after you wrote your memoir, you felt like you were on it, you were proud, you know, like I went over.
Yeah, I definitely did. And it kind of takes on its own, like it kind of becomes, it's outside of me now, right? It's not, it's kind of a separate thing. And I love that, you know, finding out that someone who lives, you know, halfway around the world has just read it or whatever. It's just kind of thrilling, and it doesn't belong to me anymore. It's you know, belong to the world now. So that's kind of cool. So
Yeah.
but do write. I mean, I just, if you, yeah, with whatever point you're at in your journey, start writing, but don't expect it to you know, publish the first stuff that comes out, I guess is a way to
Right.
say it.
Like I know
Yeah.
when I wrote for my the first time, I wrote an anthology and I wanted my story out so much that I just dumped the garbage. I just
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
then we had to break it up into chapters of
Yeah.
breaking the stages and going through the process. Because when we're writing memoirs and anthologies and based on facts and true stories, we actually go through that again. You know,
Yeah.
you relive
Yeah.
those moments. You're like, oh, I
Yeah.
remember when I did this. I remember, you know, the moment, the smell, the, you know, you
Yeah.
relive it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you wrote your first one, I'm sure that's what you went through, is you went through the process of those moments, those special
Yeah.
times. And
Yeah. And what, you know, what was really cool is I did have a fear that I wouldn't remember. And like I said, I didn't have any documents to work with. I didn't, like, some people are really good about journaling, whatever. I didn't have journal. I kept journals at times, but I didn't have them anymore. I didn't have a lot of photos or anything. And so it was just had to come from here. And I was kind of worried that I wouldn't remember enough. But what's really cool is once you start to put yourself back there, the memories sort of just come back a lot more than you might think. So that's pretty cool.
And memories are beautiful to have.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So any final words, Marilyn, before we wrap up your tea time tonight?
Oh, no, it's been really delightful talking to you. I'm so glad that we connected, and thanks for putting together that great video, and thanks for your thoughtful questions. And yeah, I feel like you and I could sit and talk for a long time about all this stuff, right?
Miss Liz just kind of opens that door where everybody, it's like coming to grandma's house and you just want to stay and have cookies all night, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. More tea. Yeah. No, I really appreciate the time that you've given me, and yeah, I appreciate you and what you're doing, and yeah, wish you all the best. And
well, thank you so much. And
yeah,
thank you
as
to
you
all
make a difference.
and thank you to all the audience and supporters of Miss Liz and all of my tea time guests. If you're interested in having any of these guests, please reach out, and you know, their platforms are there. All of the information to contact and have them on your show is all in the descriptions as well. Again, we are on Zoom. We went to plan B tonight, and we always have to have a plan B in life, because if you don't, plan A sometimes doesn't always work. So always have a plan B. My Oma in the back there, that is right beside the little girl of Miss Liz, she always told me to have a plan B. So that's what Miss Liz does. And I really want to thank you, Marilyn, for sharing and being open and giving us some education on memoirs. And for anybody out there who would like to write a memoir, you know, now they have some tools and some tips. And that's what we're here for, is to give the tools and tips. And again, a nice, beautiful, strong tea. You taught me some new words. So I'm going to use those words on people that want to say, I love you. Well, you know what? Watch this tea time and you'll see what kind of words you can use.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And I will see everybody tomorrow for a second rescheduled tea time with Amanda Ellis. And she'll be speaking about tea parties. That's right, tea parties, and a lot of psychedelic ways to heal your trauma and stuff like that. So we will be speaking a heavy deep tea tomorrow. So if anybody is triggered, please be aware that Miss Liz is not offended if you do not tune in and listen to the show. I'm only here to bring awareness and to inspire people that your story does matter too. And then I'll see everybody Thursday for 3 incredible stories. We'll be starting off at 10 a.m., 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. At 10 a.m. we'll be in Kenya, and then we'll be jumping into the United States for the afternoon and the evening. So we'll be jumping all over the world on Thursday. So again, I will see everybody tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for the next set rescheduled tea time. And again, Marilyn, thank you for joining me for tea time. And
Thank
leave your
you.
questions and comments in the bottom where you're tuning in from, because Miss Liz always wants to hear that. And I will see everybody tomorrow night at 10 a.m. And Marilyn, don't leave. I will talk to you in a few minutes. I'm just going to wrap up the live.
Sure.